Hey everyone, so today I interviewed 𝘐𝘠𝘆 from Kansas State University, and we talked about feed enzymes and some thoughts on phytase, calcium release from phytase, which has some quite counterintuitive aspect there. Superdosing phytase in nursery versus growth finishing pigs. Should we give some amino acid or energy values? And also poultry and pigs when it comes to enzymes, are there difference there? And finally, some thoughts on xylanase and protease. So with that, enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. 𝘐𝘠𝘆 here with us. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing great, Marcio. Thanks for having me on today.
Yes, I appreciate your time, and we're going to chat about recent thoughts on enzymes in swine nutrition. So the first question of the podcast, and now we're also YouTube recording here. So if you can share about your career so far and how you got involved in pig production, Dr. 𝘠𝘆.
Livestock has always been part of my life. I can go back on both of my grandparents' sides. Both grew up on family farms, and my grandfather on my dad's side, so Grandpa DeRouchey, was actually one of the first Hampshire SBF breeders in the state of South Dakota. And for our younger listeners, SBF is a health status that many producers had adopted over several decades to categorize their herd. Mm-hmm. And actually, my father ordered his first 4-H pig through the Sears Roebuck catalog, a Yorkshire gilt that came on a train from Chicago to northern South Dakota. And started his pig production on a pig that came on a train out of the Sears Roebuck catalog. So, but my family has been rooted in pigs, and my dad and me growing up with my brothers. We had the largest Chester White breeding herd in North America for many years in the 1980s and early 90s. Wow. Swine production and livestock as well, cattle and sheep, were part of my upbringing. And I went to South Dakota State in animal science and wanted to continue on in the swine area. And so I chose to go to graduate school in swine nutrition, was fortunate to get into the K-State program where I did my master's and Ph.D. And as I finished up that, my Ph.D., there was a position opening at K-State that was very heavy in extension in a regional office. And I was fortunate to get that. And after a couple of years, moved into the Department of Animal Science as a swine extension specialist. And also I do environmental manure work with producers as well. And been on staff at K-State now just over 19 years. And my role today is extension and research. So I work a lot with producers, and then as well as training of graduate students. Get involved in some teaching activities, but mainly focus on research and extension as part of my current job.
Very good. And two comments, right? One is that for those that don't know, Dr. 𝘠𝘆 was in my committee, so that was a joy to interact with you there. And then second, I mean, you guys as a group formulated for a lot of sows around the globe, so that's very it's very good, I think, when faculty members can have real life experience. Yeah. It's I think we take that as for granted sometimes.
Yeah, it's one thing, and each program's a little different, and every person in our swine industry is a little different where their interests are. And we're very fortunate here that we carry a lot of the same interests in the applied research side, as well as staying with a tight producer connection, not only in Kansas, but throughout the U.S. and the world. And we've been very fortunate to have a number of graduate students that have went on to have wonderful and rewarding careers for us, and including yourself and what you're doing, but many others as production nutritionists, others in academics, the feed industry. So that truly gives us the most joy in our jobs, is to see the students, whether graduate students in particular, but a lot of undergraduates that we work with end up in careers in the swine field.
Very good. So as we think about feed enzymes, Joe, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, this is one that, we always get a lot of questions on, and the industry is really engaged with. I mean, feed enzymes are obviously nothing new, been around for decades. Probably the most routine one, I mean, if we want to start talking about use, obviously phytase has to come to the top of the list. Phytase is is standard. You are hard-pressed anywhere in the world, quite honestly, to not find phytase in every swine diet. Now, there is cases where it's not, but in general, it's almost viewed as a commodity phytase now. And the real reason, I mean, if you go through the list of reasons, if you'd ask most, it's certainly to increase the amount of phosphorus, digestible or available, depending how you want to formulate, that's available to that pig. And thus we decrease the amount of supplemental through monocal or dical phosphate is the most typical sources in North America, at least. And we decrease to lower feed cost. And along with lowering feed cost, it decreases the amount of phosphorus excretion in manure, which helps us with our manure management plans and from an environmental standpoint. Also, the calcium. Calcium, you look through almost all data, gets released at approximately the same amount as the amount of phosphorus that gets released at the different levels that we can feed phytase. So that's probably been slower to adopt, and there's still many nutritionists that necessarily don't give a calcium credit. I think more and more over the last 5 years in particular, that's become more accepted as we've done a better job of formulating to more an available basis of both minerals or digestible basis of both minerals. So it's just standard. I mean, I don't think there's any debate there. Now, the only time that we can get into a debate is at the very high levels of phytase, whether we are confident that we're releasing 0.15, 0.16 digestible or available phosphorus. But again, those are things that are philosophical, probably outside of this talk, but again, very, very commonly used for those particular purposes.
Very good. No, that makes sense. One thing that always comes to my mind when we on that topic is, I remember a conversation I had with Dr. Stein a few years back about the calcium release, and it was interesting because we want to be conservative in general. We want to be safe, but the thought there is almost the opposite, because meaning if you don't give a calcium release, it's almost that is maybe aggressive, because too much calcium sometimes is not good. So I thought that was interesting from almost counterintuitive from that standpoint.
No, that's exactly right. And, you know, as we look at limestone, one of the lowest cost ingredients that we'd have in a diet, and actually when you give a calcium loading, you can actually increase diet cost, because what happens is as you pull limestone down and replace it with corn, you're offsetting with a more expensive ingredient. So on a least cost basis, you know, it sometimes can actually work against you, but the reality is you're exactly right. If we get too much calcium in these diets, and we clearly know that now, especially if we get over like a 2, you know, even 1.5, we could argue a lot of data 2 to 1. We know we're decreasing growth if we looked at a total or analyzed basis comparing those. And there's a lot of different ways we can look at those ratios, but that's absolutely correct. So we need to be accounting for, so we're not hurting our growth performance by using it by having too much calcium.
Very good. One thought that comes to mind also in the phytase, Dr. DeRouchey, and I know you've done several studies on that area, is the superdosing.
Yeah, so the superdosing, Beyond P, a lot of different names for that. Generally, I think what most have seen and is pretty well accepted is that we would use a superdose level. So again, it's a superdose level, for argument's sake, let's just say it's 2,000 FTUs per kilogram, you know, give or take, and depending on the product. But oftentimes we will find a nice growth benefit from that during the nursery phase, so that both really from the starter diet through the end of the nursery period, it's not uncommon that we would see an additional 1 to 2 pounds of growth by feeding a high level. And what also in that is we max out the amount of digestible phosphorus release. And so we're feeding more in addition to that. And it's still somewhat unknown. There's certainly beliefs of energy, potential energy release, indocidal, different things that may be going on. But I would say it's probably not clearly defined why that is. Now one issue is in grow finish. The grow finish data is much, much more variable. In fact, I'd probably lend that most of that data would not support an additional growth benefit above that, what we're getting in for phosphorus. But again, sometimes that comes down to replication too. We're trying to find small differences And we can maybe get into this discussion when we get into the energy and amino acid side, because that's a point I want to bring up is we recognize, it almost starts to fall into a feed additive category where we're trying to promote growth. And in these cases, we're talking about probably a 1 to maybe 2% improvement. The amount of replication that we need is quite substantial. And I'm fairly certain that's why in many cases we're not statistically finding these differences, even though they may be there on a marginal or numerical basis. We just need to get replication to test.
Right. No, that makes total sense. So I think phytase was pretty well covered there. Anything else that comes to mind that, based on your studies over the decades or even recently?
Yeah, as feed cost, as we, and I think it falls in with phytase and even with the xylanase, proteases as well. But I think with phytase, there have been continued to be more efforts looking at, do we give phytase, an amino acid, and energy credit? Okay, and really what I mean by that is, are we improving the digestibility of the diet to liberate or make more amino acids available for digestion and absorption in that base diet, as well as through that same process, are we breaking down the phytate, which may hold more of the calories that would release more energy for that pig.
Very interesting.
We've done a couple different studies looking at giving credits beyond the phosphorus and calcium in terms of an amino acid release and a energy release per a manufacturer's recommendations. And oftentimes those recommendations are developed with good research. They're done a lot of times in metabolism or done with individual pigs, and you can measure the amino acid digestibility very precisely, as well as the potential energy digestibility changes. One of the challenges we've seen is translating that exact information generated on these individual pigs into a field study. As you mentioned, we've done some research. We've seen many other research data sets. And again, there's high variation in terms of what actually is the outcome of that energy or amino acid release.
Right.
But as an example, many manufacturers would have in their spec sheets on an energy basis somewhere around about a 1% added fat release value when feeding a high level of phytase. And again, as we've looked at that, we've had a very hard time replicating a full energy release. And again, if you think about 1% added fat, about 2% improvement in feed efficiency or as well as gain. And again, here you're needing on a replication basis, you're needing to probably somewhere be around at the minimum of 20, probably around that 25 replications per treatment to start teasing out those sort of differences in a commercial setting. Right. And also the reason it's driven, it really provides the economics of phytase. Again, if phytase by itself is economical just by the use of phosphorus. Now, as we start to peel into other nutrients and energy in particular, we start talking about 1% added fat. Well, that's about $4 a ton of added costs at the current prices, looking at 1% added fat. And that's if all that energy was there, then we certainly need to be taking advantage of that reduction in feed cost or lowering of the added fat if you can give a energy uplift for the energy that phytase is providing. We've had a hard time, in our data would show some feed efficiencies that would not match up when we're trying to balance accordingly to that. There is data sets, and one of ours, when you get about half the energy, you probably get somewhat closer. But then again, you're down to 10 pounds of fat. And again, to tease out differences at these low levels is really, really hard. Amino acids would be the other one. Really, when you look at the amino acid loading values, it equals depends on the manufacturer, somewhere around 5 pounds of soybean meal per ton. Right. So really small. I mean, oftentimes our tolerances are higher than that at our mills. And so, again, I'm not saying it's not real. Practically, how we adjust for that, and again, on a cost basis, that's about 50 cents a ton if we could do that reduction of soybean meal. And so, again, you add those together, you start to get pretty big dollars per pig, if those full values were there. Unfortunately, we've had a hard time, and others the same, replicating these full release values in a commercial setting.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. And one thing that comes to mind is I've interacted with several nutritionists that are pretty much either mostly poultry or half and half poultry and pigs. And I want to hear your thoughts there, because I've seen some meta-analysis on other enzymes like protease, and you see in poultry, they seem to get more consistent, right? And in pigs is a little bit of all over the place. So your thoughts there, poultry nutrition, I guess, and pig nutrition related to enzymes.
Yeah, it is a fascinating that oftentimes some of this is done in broilers, and then shouldn't it just translate into pigs? And and we find that with different enzymes that we do not get the same level of the improvements in growth when we're feeding the different enzymes, and that's just not phytase, it's other xylanase or proteases as well. So different digestive system, different mechanisms, different retention times in the gut, all can lead to just that discrepancy. So yeah, this is one. I mean, there's a lot of times that pigs and poultry, things overlap. This is one that's been a little more challenging to just take one data set from one species and apply to the other.
Very good.
Be real careful in that.
That makes sense. So as we start getting closer to the end here, Dr. DeRouchey, any final thoughts on this area?
No, I think, one, I'm encouraged. I think our manufacturers have done a great job of developing a product that I think that we all can agree is very consistent in terms of in the phytase enzyme. Yeah. We know it's predictable on a phosphorus and calcium basis. We're starting to understand the amino acid and energy release side more, and that will continue to be developed. There's many nutritionists that give that value today, and it's continually being looked at as a way to lower our feed input costs through the use of high levels of phytase. Proteases, xylanases, again, plenty of data out there that would show some effects, but there's also plenty of data that shows the inconsistency. And I think we really have to make sure that we're designing these experiments correctly in the field to make sure we have adequate replication, and as well as just that we're getting given those enzymes the opportunity to provide improvement. I'll be honest, we live with our companies that are very innovative. We're going to keep developing these. I'm very hopeful that in years to come, we'll be looking at these other enzymes potentially as a standard in our diets as they get new generation, and whether it's mixtures or different types of molecules that are used in other industries that get adopted into our swine industry. We never lack innovation, over time in our swine nutrition area, and I feel that this is one that holds great opportunity to lower feed input costs. We just have to continue to build our confidence that those release values or what we're getting is there on a consistent pace as group after group.
Excellent. Very good. And now the three questions, Dr. DeRouchey, we ask every guest every episode. The first one is, what's your favorite pig-related resource or book?
Yeah, it's probably multiple. Like all of us, we get inundated with different information that comes. The quick reads, the National Hog Farmer, Pork Magazine, they're digital online. Both of them are really good on some current industry topics. I continue to evolve more in the podcast area, not just because I'm on this, Marcio, but yours serves as a great platform to listen in a different setting. And there's other podcasts, but I think as I evolve my knowledge, that is one where I continue to see opportunity that I'm focusing more on in my own personal development as well.
Very cool. Any resource or book in general? Could be fiction. I don't care. It's just anything that for you is being a.
The book Good to Great is one that I've really do a lot of reflecting on. That's one that I do think it's has a lot of good priority and an understanding of one's ability to prioritize and look at how to do not only professionally but personally just improve yourself.
Very cool. And it's, I believe, Jim Collins, right? He used a lot of research in there, so it's pretty science-based too. So.
Yeah.
Cool. And then lastly, what do you think sets apart successful swine professionals from those who are not? You've interacted and you've seen a lot of people grow, you know, under your eyes. So anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, I think there's two things, in my opinion, that clearly separate. One is those that want to dig in and understand the information. There's a lot of information comes out all the time, but it's those that can understand the biology and understanding of when to use certain formulations, how to value ingredients. There's a lot of things that come in that, but those that will take the extra time and truly understand the nutrition area that they're trying to formulate or know. The other one is networking. The most successful nutritionists, and again, this would be outside nutrition too, but in our swine industry, are those that continually talk and get information from others. Those that are very closed and it's not necessarily that they're not open, but they don't seek other information and input. I think those have a tendency really to struggle at times and to adapt as fast. So those that have their network and utilize it and then thus are relied back on as a resource for others, those just are opportunities to enhance, be respected, but more importantly, to learn more about what's going on in the industry. And so we're not duplicating. There's been so much duplication of research done in our commercial barns. All these facilities have barns. It's just talking to know what people are doing. So we're not wasting resources conducting the same research time and time again.
Yeah, that's huge. I remember Dr. Goodman's class. I don't know if it was the first, probably the first class. He says, you know, your best resource is the phone. Pick up the phone and call people. And I love that.
Yeah,
very good. I mean, and it's crazy because sometimes if I have a question about calcium, phosphorus, you know, if it's more the basic level, I might call Dr. 𝘠𝘠𝗏𝗄𝗆𝗆 there. It's called, you know what I mean, from a very unique, it's extremely niched type of area that we live.
Yeah, and there's a balance of digging in and learning it. You need to find out something yourself, but there's also the value of a 5-minute phone call instead of spending an entire day or afternoon on something that you could get done in literally 20 seconds by asking somebody else. So it's understanding how to use your resources effectively in your own time, of when you need to invest that time versus when to seek help.
Makes total sense. Well, very good. Thanks, Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch.
Yep. Thank you, Marcio.